excited to see so many folks here, and I'm really glad to see that you all are interested in the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. I can just start off with a round of introductions for our team. My name is Ina Lupin. I'm the program manager for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team that works on the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. With that, I'll pass it to my colleagues, Sarah and Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Risher, she, her pronouns. I'm a program analyst on the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team that's developed the Regional Climate Collaboratives program, and thrilled to see so many folks on the Zoom today. And with that, I'll kick it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen, and I'm a program associate with the CASE team, helping support with the RCC program. And it's great to have you all here today.
Great, thank you both. And for anyone who wasn't here, we'd like to welcome folks to introduce themselves in the chat as you see fit, as I see a lot of other folks are doing here today. And yeah, just really excited to see the numbers ticking up of participants, and glad to see so much interest in the program. I think we can go to the next slide, Kathleen. Great, so our agenda for today, we can go back to the last one. Our agenda for today is to walk through an overview of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program, to really dive into some of the details of the program to help you all really understand how the program will work. Also go through the application process and components of the application, as well as the technical assistance processes, scoring criteria, and we'll wrap up with some timeline and resources. And then we will also, at that point, we'll open it up to Q&A. We're trying to leave as much time as possible because I know folks will probably have lots of questions for us. And wanted to say also, as we're talking, please feel free to include your questions in the Q&A box that you'll see, and we will try to respond to as many as possible during this webinar today. But if there's anything that we don't get to, we plan on posting a Q&A document that will include all the questions, both that we answered today, but also that we may not have gotten to. So with that, maybe let's go to the next slide. Great, and then one more. Perfect. Okay, so we, as we said, are really excited to kick off this program. I think, as some of you may know, the legislation for Senate Bill 1072 was passed actually in 2018, and we only received funding for the program actually in this last budget cycle. So we're super excited to be able to finally roll out this program. And yeah, really excited to be having this webinar today. So the Regional Climate Collaboratives program will fund cross-sector networks of partners in under-resourced communities to access funding that will help advance climate solutions. As you'll see here, the program requires a creation of a collaborative stakeholder structure, which some of you may be familiar with from the Transformative Climate Communities program. Sarah will actually be talking about that a little bit in a moment, and dive a little bit more into the details of that. And we have about $8.35 million that will be available for award. And the range of funding is between $500,000 and $1.75 million. So we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So I also just wanted to let you all know the process that we've gotten to in order to develop the guidelines for this program. As I mentioned, it's been quite a long journey to get here. And so we've done a ton of engagement to ensure the program is as responsible as possible to needs on the ground. We've engaged with over 400 stakeholders in developing the program, including workshops, listening sessions, many conversations with stakeholders across the state. So just want to say thank you to everyone on this webinar who may have been a part of that design process, and also ensure that you know that we've really done a lot of work to hopefully make this program as responsive as possible. Next slide, please. So the program's 4 objectives are to develop actionable plans and projects, to build social infrastructure, to center community engagement and decision-making, and to develop equity-centered processes. We really would like to see all of the activities and the work that's happening through the Regional Climate Collaboratives program tie up to these program objectives. Let me go to the next slide, please. And so we have a number of required activity types that again tie to those overall objectives. Sarah, I believe, or one of us in our presentation will be going through some of the different required activity types so you all can see those, but the kind of overall pieces that we have here are building relationships and identifying priorities, develop plans, policies, and projects, acting as a local TA provider that can translate the funding program requirements and frame within a local context. We also have an evaluation and peer-to-peer learning activity types. And then we have a couple of optional activity types as well, including data collection and analysis and education and training. And as you'll see here, wherever is feasible, we'd like to see folks leveraging existing efforts that are happening at the regional level. Next slide, please. And so this is the list of our eligible applicants. As you'll see, we have a number of different types of organizations that are eligible to apply for the program, as well as this other organizations with a history of providing community-based outreach or technical assistance. So it's quite broad and really, I think we leave up to the communities that are applying to really recognize what the best organizations are to bring into their collaborative that have this sort of history of providing community-based outreach or technical assistance. With that, I will hand it over to Sarah to dive in a little bit more on our program details.
Great, thanks, Ina. Yeah, I will walk us through the nuts and bolts of the program, starting with the collaborative stakeholder structure. So as Ina mentioned, the RCC program is modeled most closely after SGC's Transformative Climate Communities program in the requirement for applicant teams to form a collaborative stakeholder structure that uses a shared agreement that specifies the governance of the collaborative. So we anticipate that collaboratives will include a wide variety of organization types, as seen on the previous slides that Ina walked through. So local and regional governments, CBOs, tribes, nonprofits, and small businesses. And depending on the local context, other organizations such as academic institutions, faith-based organizations, resource conservation districts may also make sense to have as part of a collaborative. And the focus should be on building a broad tent to bring in organizations that may not see themselves as climate focused to be able to address climate more holistically, and to build a broader network wherein the collaborative members can leverage each other's resources, skills, and relationships to achieve the broader climate goals of the region. And so the eligible applicants applicants will then develop their collaborative stakeholder structure during the application process and then submit one application based off of a shared vision. And then within each collaborative, the members need to determine who will serve as the managing stakeholder. And the managing stakeholder is the organization that is responsible for submitting the application on behalf of the collaborative and is responsible for the administrative components of the grant, such as coordinating payments between SGC and the partners. The managing stakeholder can play a more expansive role than the administrative pieces if desired, but it's important to really understand that the managing stakeholder's key responsibility should be around the grant administration. And the entity that is determined to be the managing stakeholder for the collaborative needs to demonstrate they have the organizational and financial capacity to receive and be accountable for the grant. And And the last thing I wanted to note here is that any eligible applicant can serve in this managing stakeholder role. It's not reserved for any one organization type. Next slide. So this slide is to provide a visual of the collaborative stakeholder structure. So all members within the collaborative need to create shared decision-making governance structures, and that their governance structure is governed by what is called a partnership agreement, which will be submitted with the full application. And then the managing stakeholder, again, is serving as the main liaison between the collaborative and the Strategic Growth Council, which is shown by this arrow here. Next slide. For region and community of focus, so each eligible communities for the RCC program need to meet the definition of under-resourced, which includes both disadvantaged and low-income communities. And this map here on the left reflects those communities in blue. In terms of the scale at which collaboratives will function, on one hand, the program, which was named in our enabling statute, is the Regional Climate Collaborative, speaks to the need for regional capacity building. Yet on the other hand, the activities required by the statute focus on building capacity at the place-based scale to fund place-based projects that impact communities in tangible ways. And so collaboratives will determine their region as a geographic area that covers 1 to 8 contiguous counties. And then within that region, they'll need to identify at least 2 census tracts that the proposed activities will focus in on. And then of the census tracts, 51% need to be determined as under-resourced, but they don't need to be contiguous. And so an applicant team can propose to work on as small of a scale as 2 census tracts in a single county, and then up to clusters of multiple census tracts across several counties, depending on what makes sense, of course, for their local context. And we are aiming to award grants across geographic regions of the state. So we wanted to ensure that this program was adaptable to different regions and their community needs. Next slide. So the mapping tools, just wanted to quickly share. We know it can be hard for applicants to determine eligibility just using the map on the previous slide. And so you all can use these 2 mapping tools to zoom in on your region a little bit more and help identify the census tracts you'd want to focus in on. And so the first map here is the priorities populations map from the Air Resources Board. And then the second one, or this first map here includes disadvantaged and one definition of low income, and then the second map by the Department of Water Resources shows more definitions of under-resourced as well. Okay, next slide. So capacity building across scale. So I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on what I just touched on. To ensure, I know it can be a little bit confusing, so collaboratives should be conducting work at a place-based level within under-resourced communities within their defined region, and then should be connecting the work that is done at the local level to regional initiatives. Additionally, the under-resourced communities within the region should be communicating and collaborating with one another and leveraging each other's work when helpful. So the focus will be on developing climate-related projects at the community level, but those plans, projects, and processes should also be feeding into regional planning or coordination processes. And we do provide a list of examples of regional planning processes collaboratives can engage in on page 12 of the guidelines. And then at the same time, we hope that regional entities will also be lending their support and expertise to the under-resourced communities within the region through supporting CBOs, providing technical assistance on specific elements of plans or policies, and supporting in other ways as needed. Okay, next slide. So I know Ina touched on this at the top, but quickly wanted to go over grant administration again. So we do have about 8.35 million total available for our grants, and then our award range will be between 500,000 and 1.75 million. And so again, this range is because we want this program to serve an array of collaboratives, whether they're emerging or established and working in very different contexts. California is such a broad state, and so we know collaboratives are at different places, and this funding, we're hoping with this funding range, collaboratives can really tailor their scope of work to what their needs are and with an amount that they can work with. And then a very exciting thing, we're thrilled that we're able to provide advance payments for the program. So up to 25 of the grant funding can be provided upfront. And this upfront payment can be one lump sum, or it can be then broken up into smaller payments. The advance payments are intended to support the smaller organizations within the collaborative that might have challenges with cash flow to initiate their work. And the managing stakeholder is able to pass through the advanced funds to these partners within the collaboratives that will get the advance payment. And in terms of reporting frequency, we'll work with each collaborative at the time of the grant agreements to determine what's the frequency that works best with them for them on advance payment and invoicing. Next slide. So for eligible costs, we have the complete list of eligible costs in the guideline. They include staff, administration, and travel, tools, subscription, and software, and some costs related to engagement, outreach, education, and training. Things we want to highlight is that we have an indirect cost rate of 30% or less. In engagement costs, we will pay for food, childcare, and participant compensation if they are directly tied to a work product from the grant that can be documented with things such as sign-in sheets or surveys. And food is only eligible when it's integral to the event, such as an evening project planning meeting where the meal is consumed as part of the event and replaces a meal otherwise missed by attending the event. And then applicants, we're asking to hold 3 to 5% of their project budget for evaluation and peer-to-peer learning. Next slide. Ineligible costs include any direct construction cost. This is a capacity building program, and we're focusing on building social infrastructure and developing plans and projects. So this money cannot be spent on any earth moving projects, unfortunately. Also on the community engagement, the funds cannot be spent on direct cash benefits or subsidies to participants, alcohol participant incentives, or general meetings that are not related to the implementation of the RCC project. All right, next slide. Okay, so for required activities, we have, as Ina mentioned earlier, we've kind of bucketed them. There's a handful of that, or several in our statute. And so this first bucket of activities are focused around building relationships, identifying priorities, and developing plans, policies, and projects. These are all activities related to bringing together the right people and organizations to identify community priorities and develop projects to meet those needs. All activities on this list, but are required, but are still somewhat high-level descriptions of themselves. So we'll ask applicants to kind of build out what each of these activities will look like in the context of their own region and communities. Next slide. So this second bucket of required activities is supplement program-specific technical assistance and act as a local technical assistance provider that can translate funding program requirements and frame them within a local context. So these speak more to the role of the collaboratives in providing technical assistance to organizations in the region that they're seeking to get projects funded, and providing them with the knowledge, project management support, and other necessary support to help them successfully apply to grants and successfully implement those projects. And again, these will look different depending on the context. And we're encouraging folks to build off any existing work that's already happening in the region that would fit well into these activities for your scope of work. Next slide, please. Okay, so the final two buckets for the required activities are evaluate project implementation and peer-to-peer learning. So these will be part of the implementation technical assistance that collaboratives will receive. So the evaluation, there's nothing in the application that you all would need to worry about right now. It's something that collaboratives will work through at the beginning stages of the grant term. And then the peer-to-peer learning, we're asking each collaborative set aside funding to attend quarterly peer-to-peer learning sessions. And this will entail SGC-led trainings, as well as contributing to peer-to-peer learning and sharing sessions. Next slide. So we also have two buckets of optional activities, and the first of these is data collection and analysis. So many areas of the state have pointed to a lack of available data or unclear data being a barrier to clearly identifying community needs and possible solutions. So data collection and analysis related to helping further your program objectives and overall goal of the capacity building to fund mitigation, adaptation and resiliency projects are eligible under this grant. And then the second one is education and training. This is a bit distinct from peer-to-peer learning in a sense that this education is focused on curriculum-based courses, potentially using a cohort or class model, whereas a training is a single topic overviews or deep dives for whatever the necessary organization or people are looking to build knowledge in that topic. Next slide. Great. So for strategies, each of the strategies that are listed in the previous slides need to be connected to a strategy that is tailored to the needs and opportunities of the region and communities of focus, while also aligning with the program objectives. And so strategies should reflect and build upon the vision statement and may focus on specific climate issues such as wildfire or urban heat, or they may focus more broadly on climate resilience, partnership development, or raising awareness. Strategies can vary in scope and scale, with some strategies concentrating on specific areas of focus, while others will apply to multiple communities of focus or the entire region. In developing work plans, applicants should propose tasks associated with each strategy to provide more detail on how the collaborative plans to implement their proposed strategies. So single strategies are not required to address all required activities in the guidelines at once, but a suite of strategies a collaborative will propose to carry out must collectively address all of the required activities. And I have a sample example of this on the next slide. So this here is an example, and we have a lot more examples in our activities or strategies table. We can drop a link to that in just a moment. But so one example of a strategy could be to develop a wildfire resiliency career pathway program for youth in the communities of focus. And so then the example task could be that in the collaborative, there's a resource conservation district, a community college, and a small business, a local landscaping business, and they co-create a vegetation management workforce development program. And then the community-based organizations that are within the collaborative that hold the relationships in those communities will take lead on outreach and engagement for enrollment of the program. And then this correlates to two of the required activities, conducting community engagement and then assisting in the development of local job training and anti-displacement programs and policies. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm near the end, so I just have two more slides before I pass it over to Kathleen. So I just wanted to quickly give an overview of what the project deliverables are. So the first of these is the action plan, and this is to be used to organize the work of the grantees at the beginning of the grant term and build off the scope of work to create any additional details needed on roles and responsibilities, timelines, and detailed tasks for each activity. And then evaluation plans will also be a required component of the action plan, which again, applicants will not need to worry about providing any information on besides holding back that 3 to 5%. The second is the capacity building toolbox. This is a deliverable that's created throughout the grant term to be finalized at the end of the grant term. And again, grant terms are 3 years. The focus is on communities within the collaboratives region having the resources available to sustain the capacity building work once the grant, beyond the grant term ending. And then the last one here is the community climate solutions inventory. So this is an inventory of the priority plans and projects that collaboratives developed or updated during the grant term and intend to seek funding to implement. Okay, next slide. And these 2 project deliverables are pretty standard. So regular reports that are accompanied with invoicing and the advanced payment forms. We're also envisioning that grantees won't have to do too heavy of a lift on these regular reports because we will have regular check-in meetings with grantees and to incorporate aspects of like oral reporting into the program. And then the last one is the annual report. This is required in our statute and basically requires that annual report is provided to SGC to share an update on the grant activities, and the evaluation feeds into the annual report. And there'll be TA from both RCC program staff and our implementation technical assistance providers on the annual report piece. And then my very final comment here, I know I've been talking for quite some time now, is that in the guidelines, we included this and want to reiterate it here. Any tribal data or traditional ecological knowledge can be excluded from reporting in order to maintain confidentiality when desired by the participating tribe. Okay. That's all for me. So I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so now we're gonna move on to discussing the application process and components. So we will have a 2-phased application process, a pre-proposal application that will be due on Friday, July 15th. And the full application will be due on Friday, October 7th. The pre-proposal is not required in order to submit the full application, but we highly recommend that applicants do submit a pre-proposal. We cannot guarantee application TA to applicants who do not submit a pre-proposal. The pre-proposal process should help applicants think through some of the components that will be required as part of their full application. We are not asking applicants to develop a budget and work plan for the pre-proposal phase. These will be required at the full application stage though, and we will provide budget and work plan templates to help applicants develop those components of the full application. And the pre-proposal process in general is meant to be a helpful way for applicants to conceptualize what their collaborative will look like and get feedback before working on the full application. And in addition to that, we will be releasing a resource document that offers information for applicants on how to navigate state plans, policies, data tools, and funding resources. It will also offer guidance and best practices around effective collaborative processes and coalition building, and highlight some case studies of collaborative efforts that may spark ideas for applicants as they are scoping out their RCC program work. So the pre-proposal will now I will be walking you all through the pre-proposal. It will be filled out and submitted through Microsoft Forms. We have recently received some requests for a Word document version of the questions so that applicants can draft their responses on a separate document before inputting them into the Microsoft Forms. That we're working on making that available, and we'll send out an announcement once it's posted on the SGC website. Though if folks would want to email to them directly, you can let us know. And now I'm going to share my screen, or I'm going to switch my screen share to show, to quickly demo the pre-proposal application. So let me end this one. Oh yeah, sorry. Here is that's just like a screenshot of what the pre-proposal, the first page of the pre-proposal form looks like. And okay, so now I'm gonna switch over to the form. I'm just gonna copy the link and pull it up. Apologies for seeing all my tabs. All right, so this is the pre-proposal form, and it begins with an introduction and grant partners section. So this is the introduction, and please be sure to read the introduction before you begin to fill out the form. Each section has its own set of instructions to read as well before filling out the sections. And here's the grant partners section. And there's also instructions here, and there you will see that there's mandatory questions as well as optional questions that each lead to more questions depending on if there's additional ones or not. So I'm just gonna demonstrate how to fill this out. So I said that yes to additional partners. So it pulls up a partner to option, and then so on and so forth. So I will click next. Oh, did I forget something? Oh, this one. Okay. So then I will hit next. This is section 2, region and communities of focus. So here's the instructions, and then we just move along in the application. Draft vision statement, program objectives, and then this is the last section before submitting, and it's a project summary. So this is where you'll enter your strategies and activities. And I will head back to the slides. So the full application will be released on or before the date when the pre-proposals are due in July. And the full application will be due Friday, October 7th. Please be sure to review the guidelines to make sure your application meets all of the requirements. And again, the program thresholds are on page 25 of the guidelines. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the TA that we provide. So we have enlisted 4 TA providers to provide application TA. Another team will be enlisted later for implementation TA. Our application TA partners are Estelano Advisors, California Coalition for Rural Housing, Institute for Local Government, and Better World Group. Applicants will be assigned one of the TA providers upon review of their pre-proposal application. And now we're going to discuss scoring criteria. So the guidelines also discuss the scoring criteria in detail on page 26. And this includes an example of the scoring table with all the point allocations. Applications will be scored on their vision statement, project need and region, program objectives and strategies, collaborative stakeholder structure, and work plan and budget. We won't have time today to go through the scoring criteria in detail, but I recommend that applicants review the scoring criteria and guidance in the guidelines as you're developing the concept for your collaborative to take scoring considerations into account early in the process. Now we're going to quickly discuss timeline and resources. So this is the timeline of the application process through the end of the year. We will host 3 more webinars in June with the dates and the times listed on this slide. And we will also be available via email for any further questions or assistance at ta@sgc.org. And we will also type that in the chat as well. And I'm going to change my screen one more time to go through the resources page on the SGC website, which we will also drop a link for that as well. And this page is basically the hub for all RCC application materials and resources, which include the guidelines and the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability. So this is that page. So it just goes, the first thing is the NOFA button, which if you click that, it just shows that document. A lot of good information in there. And then gives an overview of some of the things that we discussed for the overall application. And then here's some registration links for the webinars. This was today's webinar, and then these are the next 3 that we're hosting. And then some important links like the guidelines, resources, the pre-proposal form link, and the RCC fact sheet. And then that I will head back to the slides and hand it off to Ina.
Great. Thank you both for going through all of that. I've been just responding to some of the questions here in the chat, but wanted to respond to a few of them verbally as well. So we had a question from Keith Pizzoli on how we define regional linkages. I'm hoping that the presentation was able to kind of provide a little bit more detail there, but the way that we define region is in the sort of 1 to 8 contiguous counties. If there's more to that question, please let me know, but I'm hoping that's response to that. We have a question here around the difference between the RCC program and the TCC planning grant. That's a really good question. I think there are a few things that are different between RCC and TCC and the TCC planning grant. One of the biggest ones is that RCC is really focused on long-term capacity building over a larger region. And has this requirement of a collaborative stakeholder structure that is, providing, technical assistance and support that's helping, with some planning, but there's a lot of more focus on capacity building and technical assistance, as well as I believe that the TCC planning grant has it may be just one applicant, whereas in our case, we're asking for larger collaboratives to come together to do this work. We also have a question about, is this grant only to develop plans, but not to implement them? We must solicit additional funding to actually implement these plans and projects. Yeah, that's a really great question. So essentially, this program is really meant to help build capacity to both plan for, secure funding for and implement projects and plans. So we're not funding any infrastructure. We can't fund, if the collaborative, for example, ends up identifying a need for a housing project or an urban greening project, that's not something that our program would fund, but we can fund a lot of the, sort of work that happens around developing that project, providing technical assistance to ensure that that project, comes together and that there's a grant application that comes together, and then could also support some of the implementation of that project. I hope that helps to explain a little bit, but please continue to feel free to add questions in the chat if anyone has additional questions about any of these responses. We have a question from Bryn Lindblad. Can you repeat these pre-proposal TA providers and how we get in touch with them? So the TA providers will really be supporting with outreach for the most part during the pre-proposal phase. And so we would request that folks reach out to our TA email address that we shared, and we may connect you with the TA providers at this phase to kind of start thinking through and scoping the project. But really the main time when you'll be getting in touch with the TA providers to really help with the application will be after you've submitted the pre-proposal, SGC staff has reviewed it and has some feedback, and then we would connect you with the TA providers who can kind of help the applicant craft that full application and integrate any feedback that may have come forward. We have a question: will you be funding 2 or more applications from the same region if they have entirely different strategies, or will you be suggesting that these applicants collaborate instead? That's a really interesting question. I think that's something that we'll probably actually need to do a little bit more thinking about. We don't, in our requirements, or sort of in the scoring that we have for the program, we don't necessarily focus on we'll score each proposal individually, but I think that this is a really good question for us to kind of think about and potentially come back to you all about in the Q&A document that I mentioned. Is the general audience webinar different from today's? That's a great question. So we will be having a networking session as a part of the webinars that we do, as well as we'll be diving into a little bit more of the details of the pre-proposal process and the full application. So essentially we'll have more time during those sessions, and then we'll have that opportunity for a networking session afterwards. So it will be a little bit different. We wanted to make sure that we got a chance to kind of give you all an overview of the program as soon as possible, and to get this recording out there, and then to have a chance to come back to folks when you've had maybe a chance to steep a little bit more in the program and we have some additional questions that are coming up. We have a question. If a group has experience working with one of the TA providers, can that be taken into consideration during the TA assignment process? That's a great question. I think that's maybe another one that we should do a little bit more thinking about and include a response to that. We do have in the pre-proposal an opportunity for folks to add additional comments. And if you would like to add a request for a certain TA provider, you can definitely do so. I think we'll need to kind of figure out on our end, how we'll be coordinating and organizing ourselves with assigning TA. Let's see. We have a question, just to be clear, are you looking for organizations within the same county or from several counties? I wasn't sure you were reviewing eligibility. I think to respond to this question, the way that the region is set up, so essentially an applicant will come forward with a regional boundary that's defined, and it can be anywhere from 1 to 8 contiguous counties, and then there are those communities of focus that we talked about. So it kind of depends on how you draw the boundaries of the work that you'll sort of the area within which you'll be doing your work. And so you would want to make sure that the organizations that you work with have a history of working within those boundaries. I hope that responds to that question, but please feel free to add more in here if you feel that doesn't adequately address that question. The California Workforce Development Board have their own regions. If our local workforce development boards apply, can we utilize the regions we have already established? Yeah, so we're very flexible in terms of the way that region is defined. It's really, we're leaving it very much up to applicants within that requirement of the 1 to 8 county contiguous area. So as long as it fits that definition, that certainly could work. It would be great if you could provide a platform for networking by regions, like the Empower Innovations one used by the Energy Commission and now CARB, or other networking sessions by region. Would that be possible? So partners can be brought on even after the planning pre-proposal for implementation. That's a great idea. That's certainly something that we can put some thought into. So thanks for flagging that. Let's see. In the guidelines, it states that the managing stakeholder must have experience and expertise in climate change mitigation, adaptation, and/or resilience, with a focus on the areas of intervention proposed within the work plan. Can you please confirm? I would say yes. Anything that's included in the guidelines is definitely is the requirement for our program. I think this is one that if folks have questions about, oh, I saw Sarah raise her hand. Do you want to jump in, Sarah?
Yes, I can jump in here. So this isn't like a must have. There is within the guidelines. Let me pull up what page. It's just some attributes that through our engagement work, a lot of stakeholders raised that would be valuable for a managing stakeholder to have, in addition to the organizational and financial capacity that's required of managing stakeholders within our enabling legislation. But through our engagement, we've come up with a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 other attributes that would make for a really strong managing stakeholder. I think it could be okay if, not all of these attributes are met exactly, but if they have multiple of them, in addition to the financial and organizational capacity. Does that answer your question?
Great. Yeah, I think that that's great as a response. Thank you for jumping in there, Sarah. I think I was actually out on leave when a lot of the work was happening on the guidelines, and Sarah and Kathleen both were much more in the weeds on some of these things. So thanks so much for jumping in to respond on that piece. Let's see. Is the signed partnership agreement for the collaborative needed for the pre-application, or is this due for the final application? Yes, that's only due for the final application, not for the pre-application. So I think Kathleen walked through, we'll basically be asking folks to include some ideas around the partnership structure in that pre-proposal. And essentially being able to list out some of the partners and who with the managing stakeholder is. But again, the pre-proposal is really kind of just an opportunity for folks to kind of draft out their idea for their regional climate collaborative and to get some feedback. So we certainly won't be holding you to anything that's written in that pre-proposal. It's really just an opportunity to start thinking through some of these pieces that will need to be much more solidified at the time of final application. Given the regional program name, but the community of focus identification, do you think more localized collaboratives will be competitive, i.e. a smaller group of DACs within one county versus a collaborative across multiple counties? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I would suggest that any questions related to competitiveness, that folks just look at the scoring criteria that we included in the guidelines. There's quite a bit of detail there about how we'll be scoring collaboratives. And, I think that hopefully will be able to be responsive to that question. But yeah, I think there's no reason to think that, you know, a program that's larger or smaller would necessarily do better. I think we're really just looking to see that that folks are meeting the requirements, that the communities of focus are under-resourced communities, or at least 51% of them are, and that there's been some clear thoughtfulness around, you know, why those communities were selected and why that regional size was selected overall. Do you intend to award only one proposal for each region? This is a great question. We don't have any like specific definition of region in the way that we've set out our guidelines. So we won't be like having any regional allocation or thinking about it in that way. I would say, you know, it would be great as folks are putting together their applications to try as much as possible to kind of be aware of and collaborate with folks that may be putting in applications within your region. But we don't have any intent to kind of have any specific geographic distribution requirement where we are funding one proposal per each region. Is there a limit to how many partners can team in one submission? No, we don't actually have any limit. So we just have the minimum of 4 stakeholders, 1 managing stakeholder, and then 3 project partners. That certainly encourage folks to engage a number of different partners. I think the one caveat to that is to really be thoughtful about the partners and ensure that they have an active role to play within the budget. But yeah, there's no maximum for sure. Will teams be able to add partners in the second stage, for example, to fill a gap or needed identified after submission review? Yes, so we will have in the pre-proposal phase, this is basically an opportunity for you to just share ideas. So you can absolutely add more partners when you put together your full application. Even at the time of full application, if you don't necessarily have all your partners on board, we do have an option for folks to add in a set aside amount for potential future grant partners. And so there's information in the guidelines about that piece. But yeah, we're trying to be as flexible as possible and recognize that there may be some new partners that that may kind of be interesting to engage in this process later on down the line. This funding will be funding relationships, building events and activities. Could this grant fund an event that builds community and resiliency at the same time? Could it plan a garden work day that brings together folks from around the community to connect, collaborate, and build resiliency? Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to be very creative about the types of engagement and the work that's happening. And we would really just look to see that, you know, the different pieces and components of the work plan have clearly match the required and optional activities that we're looking for in the guidelines. And then essentially that, you know, the activities that are happening are connected to that kind of overall strategy. But as long as there is a connection there, I definitely think there's an opportunity to be really broad and creative and thoughtful in how to best engage with community through this grant. Regional scope. Must the collaborative reach or serve an entire county at a minimum? For example, if the collaborative has a focus on connecting communities within the city of LA, is this a wide enough scope or reach? So the way that we have identified the regional size in the guidelines is really for that like 1 to 8 contiguous county size. And so we are bound to what's included in our guidelines. But again, we have that focus, that opportunity to really have some communities of focus. So, it may be possible to kind of think more broadly about, LA County, think about, how there are opportunities to scale up to that sort of larger regional level while working more specifically in the communities of focus. Are there specific implementation grants that will be available or that you will be helping to facilitate grantees towards, like TCC or others? Yeah, so I think we would love to see folks apply for TCC. I think RCC grantees to do so, or really any other grants that they're interested in. There isn't a specific focus even on state grants or California climate investments more broadly. I think that we're also open to collaboratives thinking about funding from the federal level, the regional level, the state level, and also potentially funding from other sources as well, like foundations or other sources of funding. So really not being overly prescriptive in terms of where the funding might come from. Let's see, and I see that we're getting close to time here. So maybe I'll just respond to one more question. And sorry, Sarah, I saw you just went off mute.
Oh, I think we're on the same wavelength. Wanted to just flag the time, and yeah, there's so many great questions. So we'll be able to pull together a Q&A document and get these answered as soon as we can.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, I will just respond to this question here. How do you envision reimbursement between SGC and the managing stakeholder, and then to collaborative participants for implementation services? How does the new AB5 law affect the ability to have gig workers submit invoices to a managing stakeholder for work on projects? This is an interesting question. So I think the sort of main relationship will be between SGC and the managing stakeholder in terms of dispersing funds. And so the managing stakeholder will be the one who submits invoices to us, and SGC will disperse funds to the managing stakeholder. The managing stakeholder will then coordinate funding all of the partners on the grant. I think this is an interesting question about the AB5 law. I think we would have to get back to you all on that. And the other piece, though, that I will say is, I believe that Sarah talked a little bit about this already, but we do have an opportunity for advance payment as well, of paying up to 25% of the full grant amount in advance. And so again, that would go through the managing stakeholder, but then the managing stakeholder could disperse that to partner organizations at that point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, no, you're good. I just wanted to quickly respond to some questions that have been coming in about how will folks know who's in their region that is also putting together a collaborative, and just put give another plug for our upcoming workshops in June 8th, 9th, and 10th. At the within those workshops, we'll have networking sessions for folks to continually meet other interested partners in their region. And then I think this event today is we'll brainstorm as a team on other ways we can help folks meet one another in a way where SGC is removed from that process.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And thank you everyone for all of these great questions. Really so thrilled to see so many folks here and that so many of you have stayed until the bitter end. So we will wrap up all of these questions. We'll send a recording out to everyone who joined, and we will look into whether or not we can share the list of folks who attended the webinar today, and if so, send that out to folks as well. So thank you again. We'll wrap up for now, but hopefully look forward to seeing a lot of you at our workshops June 8th through 10th. And thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.